Following UFC Fight Night Kansas City, Dana White at the post-fight presser gave us some updates, I guess you could say, regarding International Fight Week, Jones versus Aspinall, but then he also confirmed that Dricus du Plessis versus Khamzat Chimaev is a done deal. Now, you might be saying, we already knew that this was a done deal. Why are you talking about this, Jake? Why do you keep talking about Khamzat versus DDP? When did we know that this was a done deal? This is absolutely the fight that should be happening next. It should have happened back in February instead of Dricus du Plessis versus Sean Strickland. I feel like a lot of us feel that way, right? But to say that it was already a done deal, like we've seen the UFC, man, where it's like certain fights are supposed to happen and they never come to fruition. But we've known that the UFC, obviously, they want to get Khamzat Chimaev in a title opportunity, and that is the fight that should absolutely be happening next. But a lot of it was rumors of, yes, this is the fight that's going to happen next. It was, Dana, we'll talk about it on Tuesday. We'll see how this thing plays out. We'll talk about it on Tuesday. So certain things, it seems like, yeah, that's the obvious thing, but until we hear it from Dana White, we don't necessarily know the direction that they're going to go. So it's good to hear him confirm that, which we'll take a look at that. But just a couple clips that I want us to look at, which is the first one, him confirming that Ian Garry is actually going to be the backup fighter at UFC 315 for Belal Muhammad versus Jack Della Maddalena, which is absolutely incredible that Ian has gotten himself into that position. And by taking, Shavkat Rakhmonov, taking Carlos Pratis, and doing the things that he's done, he's really put himself in a nice position, coming off of a great win like that over Carlos Pratis. And then we hear him kind of talk about International Fight Week, right? Islam Makhachev, Ilia Topuria, John Jones versus Aspinall, some different things that are kind of brewing because he doesn't give us much. But I'm going to react and kind of give my thoughts on it because I think that if we read in between the lines, we can kind of see what's going on here with those fights and the potentials of what could possibly be at International Fight Week. So let's start with him confirming Ian Garry getting that backup fighter role.
Pratis obviously was trying to finish the fight, so.
Ian announced himself as the official backup for your welterweight title fight in Montreal. Is that official? Did he just announce that himself?
It's official. Yeah.
All right, cool. And
that is badass, man, of Ian Garry. The fact that he was supposed to be fighting Joaquin Buckley, moves into a position to where Belal Muhammad had to pull out. So they had Shavkat Rakhmonov versus Ian Garry, and Ian didn't necessarily have to take that fight, man, right? And neither did Shavkat, which is what made that fight very entertaining. And, it felt like a true number one contender fight. And while it wasn't maybe the most entertaining fight, we got to see that Ian Machado Garry is world class, as well as Shavkat. And then he comes back against Carlos Pratis on short notice to get back in the win column and puts on a really solid, well-rounded performance against Carlos to where he just never let him get going, man. He kept him guessing every time Carlos would try to crash him up against the fence and start to let the combinations go. That's when Ian Garry would level change. Never allowed Carlos to feel comfortable at any moment in the fight. While he got into some trouble later on, Ian Garry did just a really good job controlling the fight from start to finish. So it was a very good performance by Ian Garry. And the fact that he has worked himself into this position here, I think that it is well-earned, well-deserved, considering going out there and making Shavkat look human, where Shavkat was the boogeyman and going out there and doing what he did. I know Jeff Neal did well against Shavkat, but you get my point. Ian Garry has shown he is one of the better fighters in the division. Going out there and doing that to Pratis, he absolutely has put himself in position for that. But then let's hear him talk about International Fight Week, right? Because we all know when you come out and you make the announcements that Max Holloway versus Dustin Poirier 3 is going to be happening, Kamaru Usman versus Joaquin Buckley as the Fight Night headliner for UFC Atlanta, people are going to start talking. They're going to say, well, wait a minute, that's UFC 318. We know about UFC 316 with Merab versus Sean O'Malley. We know about these different things, but what about International Fight Week? That's one of the biggest pay-per-view events, one of the biggest events of the year, and it just seems like the main event, it's all up in arms, right? It was conversations about DDP versus Khamzat, and then it was DDP's kind of injured, and then we saw DDP online and his coach saying, that's all BS, man. I'm fine. I'm ready to go. we are fighting Khamzat next. It's not just going to be at International Fight Week. So we're going to hear Dana confirm that that is a done deal, because I think that that's important to hear from Dana that it's a done deal, like I said, because even though we all feel like we know a fight's going to happen, that doesn't always mean that the fight is going to happen. We've seen some crazy shit in the sport, so we'll listen to that. But then also, he's going to talk about Ilia versus Islam, because the way that he's going to deliver this, I think that it's kind of telling, and given the fact that we haven't heard an announcement on the main event, I think it's going to be very telling as to how this thing is going to play out for International Fight Week, but we'll get to that in just a second.
We are still waiting for a main event for International Fight Week, and I'm sure you were willing and ready to break that for us now. Who is main eventing that?
Well, I just announced some fights yesterday, and that wasn't one of them.
You see how excited Dana is, man? I feel like this is important here. Look, he's taking a drink out of that power slap cup. He's smiling. If Dana was pissed off about the options for International Fight Week and things were falling apart, I feel like he'd be really edgy around this topic. He wouldn't be on Instagram Live kind of teasing, like, is there any more fights you want to announce? Dana's like, no. Or when someone was like, do you have an announcement for International Fight Week? And he was like, no. You know what I mean? Like messing around and kind of playing with us a little bit. That's usually not what Dana does if they're in absolute panic mode trying to figure out what's going on with an event, right? I could be wrong there, but it seems like, look how he's smiling, man, right over the top of that cup. He's like, wait till you see what we got for International Fight Week, man. Like, I hope that that's the case, right? But that's kind of the vibe I'm getting here from Dana. And we'll get to my thoughts in just a second. But I just wanted to mention that, man. It seems like we got something brewing here for International Fight Week.
Yeah, there's a couple you didn't announce that people were kind of hyped for. There's some rumors. There was rumors that it was going to be Khamzat DDP. Turns out that doesn't look like it's true. There's now rumors it's going to be Ilia Topuria versus Islam. Is that a...
Well, we all know that fight's happening. The Duplessis versus Khamzat fight. It's happening. It's just not happening in International Fight Week. That fight's done. Okay. Just not happening that.
And Ilia...
We all know what's happening, right? Now, here's the thing. I get that after UFC 308, it was like, you know, Dana's like, well, we got to see how things play out or whatever it was. And yeah, we all have kind of like known, right, that is the fight that's going to be next, or assume that the fight is going to be next. My point is, it's good to hear from Dana that is a done deal, because if you would have asked me after Khamzat beat Whitaker at UFC 308, I would have been like, it's a done deal. He's fighting DDP next. What are you talking about? Sean Strickland getting the rematch? Like, I could see them maybe doing that, you know, next down the line if DDP's able to get through Khamzat, which I don't think he does. But you know what I mean? Like, I don't understand, like, how everyone was just, you know, so yes, obviously we thought that was the fight that's the fight that was going to happen. But hearing that it is a done deal means a lot here, because we've seen where we all kind of are thinking something's going to happen next, and then for whatever reason, the UFC just doesn't go that route, which in this scenario, given what Khamzat is in the sport, he's a massive star. He's someone that has put himself in position to earn a title opportunity. Absolutely the fight that should be happening, and it just seemed like that could have been a potential headliner for International Fight Week. And then hearing the injury rumors about DDP and possible interim titles being on the line, and all those things kind of put things up into arms. But to hear that that's a done deal, very good to hear.
Islam?
What's that?
Ilia versus Islam?
We'll see.
Okay.
We'll see how it plays out.
Now, you see how he's smiling when he said that, okay? So here's my take on this, right? And let me know what you guys think down in the comments. And by the way, if you enjoy these kinds of videos, do me a favor, subscribe to the channel. I would greatly appreciate it. But it seems to me like the reason that we're getting this close at this point to International Fight Week, right? We're about 2 months away, I think. And normally, yes, sometimes it takes some time for us to know a headliner if the UFC's trying to figure out some details. But if we connect the dots a little bit here, right? We've kind of heard some different things from the camp of Ilia Topuria. We've heard some different, outlets and sources, and it's kind of hard to trust exactly what's going on per se until we hear from the UFC, because fighters in these different sources, they're going to kind of say what they're hearing from people that are trying to push for certain fights, right? So that's kind of the reality there. But I think if we read into this, it's the fact that if Ilia Topuria, if Islam Makhachev, his next fight is going to depend on probably what happens at UFC 315. Because I think if Belal Muhammad wins, there's the chance that we see Ilia versus Islam at International Fight Week. However, if Jack Della Maddalena is able to pull off an upset against Belal Muhammad, I don't know who the favorite is at this point. I think it would be an upset because I think Belal wins. So it would be an upset in my eyes. But if Jack Della was able to pull it off at UFC 315, I don't think that there's any question that Islam would then move up to fight JDM, to where we would then have Ilya versus Charles Oliveira for a vacant or interim, I guess it would be vacant title at International Fight Week, meaning Islam would move up unless he just tries to go for double champ to, still be around in both divisions. I think that is what the UFC is looking at here. I think that that is the holdup. I think that is the pause, to where shortly after UFC 315, that's most likely, I guess, what we will find out what is going on with International Fight Week. So that seems what this is all coming down to. I feel like a lot of us have kind of began to realize that UFC 315 is going to kind of dictate what happens for International Fight Week. But just cool to hear, I guess he didn't give us much here, but I think that we can all tell by how smiley Dana is. They have the plans in place. It's either going to be Ilya versus Charles for a vacant or interim title, depending on what Islam does, or Islam is going to move up to 170 pounds. And, from kind of what we've been hearing, man, Bilal's been very vocal about not wanting to fight Islam. And we've heard from Khabib, right, not, about, Bilal's our friend. We don't want to go that route. But we haven't, I just don't know, right? Because again, when the UFC sits them down and talks to Islam, right? And I know Khabib, obviously, he's the coach, and him and Islam are obviously very, very close. But sometimes it's like, how are things going to play out, considering that is a dream and a goal of Islam? It'll be interesting to see how those things play out. So there's a chance he moves up regardless, but I don't know that he fights Bilal, right? I know that a lot of people are kind of, saying, I think he still fights Bilal, Jake. I think he still does. I don't know about that. But either way, I think that we get Ilya Topuria at International Fight Week. It's just going to be a matter of, is it against Islam or is it against Charles? And I think that Islam could potentially be going up to 170 pounds. So I think that those are the plans there, for that. Now let's listen to him talk about Tom versus Jones, because we've had, some different things with this for a while, man, where it's like, is this fight even going to happen? Is it going to happen? Is it going to happen? When's it going to happen? Because it just seems like this is one of those massive fights that just is not going to happen. It just feels that way, man. And don't get me wrong, I'm hoping that it happens, because I would love for this fight to happen. I mean, it's super intriguing, right? John Jones, one of the greatest of all time. Tom Aspinall, who's this new generational style of heavyweight. It's a big fight, man. It's a massive fight. And you're going to hear Dana here give his thoughts on it, and I agree with him on this. So let's hear what he has to say.
The big one is obviously John versus Tom Aspinall. This week was a funny one. Someone reported that the fight's done, it's got a date. Then the next day someone reported the fight's off, and then John's not taking it. Where do we stand with that fight?
Everything you hear is bullshit until we say it.
So that fight is still the target for both men?
I've said it many times that's the fight that we want to make this year.
Okay.
Yeah.
At the beginning of the year, you said you were super confident. It's definitely going to happen. Are you still super confident?
Still super confident.
Cool.
Boom. Okay, so Dana White and the UFC or Dana at least, is confident that that fight is going to happen. Now, and me, how confident am I? I mean, I'm like 60-40. 60% that it won't happen, 40% that it will. Obviously, I hope that the 40% is right, man. I hope that we get this fight. I'm nervous on the side of, we know Aspinall wants it. We know the UFC wants it. It just sounds like it's something that sounds like it's going to be on the side of John Jones from what we've been hearing. Now, here's the thing. We don't know what's going on behind the scenes. Could it be money? Could it be this? Could it be that? It could be a number of different things. The UFC is pretty good at keeping things, behind closed doors when it comes to the negotiations and those kinds of things, and not letting that stuff creep out. But I think that the fact that Dana and the UFC want that fight to happen, that is powerful, because there's a lot of times to where they want fights to happen that we don't want to happen, and they end up happening. So whenever the UFC actually wants something to happen, they usually can make it happen, man. They usually can make it happen, and this is one of the fights, obviously, that we all want to see. I mean, there's certain fights that we don't want to see, like Merab versus, O'Malley, running that one back right now. But the UFC, you figure that they were locked in on trying to make that happen. So if they actually want something to happen, we know that they are motivated to get it done. So hopefully they can figure this out. But listen to what he has to say here about the magnitude of it, because this is what I've been saying the whole time. I think that this is the biggest heavyweight of all time. One of the biggest, at least for sure. And it's one of the biggest fights they can currently make in the promotion.
In your career, do you remember another fight that people are kind of bitching at you about as much as...
Oh, yeah, there's been plenty. But I've said since day one, this will be the biggest heavyweight fight in the history of the company and in the history of the sport. This will be a big one.
I agree with them 100%, man. That's what I've been saying, and then there's people out there that are like, no, this won't be the biggest heavyweight fight of all time. How about Brock Lesnar? And dude, John Jones, one of the greatest of all time, who goes up to heavyweight, beats Cyril Gane like it's nothing, beats up on, he was old and washed at this point, Stipe Miocic, goes in there against the new generation of heavyweight, the guy in Tom Aspinall, who everyone's basically been saying John is ducking, which to a degree I do think that that's going on. John knows that this is a dangerous challenge, and you guys know I've been critical. Whenever John seems like there's a super dangerous, powerful challenge on his side, that's when he needs all these different things to be met in order to take those kinds of fights. But the point is, that would be massive. And if John goes out there and he was able to pull it off against Aspinall, man, that would just really solidify Jones's legacy, to be quite honest with you. And I think that that's the way the UFC's looking at it, is if he goes out there and beats Aspinall, Dana and the UFC get to be like, we told you so, man. We told you this about this guy. And then if Aspinall goes out there, the investment in the young Tom Aspinall, who can now be the face of the heavyweight division, you could argue and say, he's right up there with Jones. Obviously, he's not as popular, I guess, or as Jones, because Jones has been around for so long. But Aspinall's developing a nice, solid fan base, man. And if the UFC, I think that that's the way they see this. If John wins, Dana looks brilliant because he's like, I've been telling you, if we all walk into a room, you know who's walking out, man. It's John Jones. But then if Aspinall goes out there and wins, that new generation of heavyweight and one of the faces of your organization now would be Tom Aspinall. So it's kind of an investment investing in Tom Aspinall to make this fight happen. And then just the fact that it is one of the biggest fights in the UFC at present. And we know one of the big critiques is the UFC not getting these massive fights booked anymore. It's been kind of the, something that's happened over the past few years. We haven't seen those huge fights get booked and come to fruition. So hopefully the UFC can pull it off. I'm hopeful. I'm curious to see what happens for International Fight Week. But if you guys enjoyed this video, please let me know what your thoughts are down in the comments. What do you think the headliner will be for International Fight Week? And then do you ultimately think Jones versus Aspinall happens? I hope that we get it, man, because I think that it would be a great fight. It would be really interesting to see how John deals with Tom, how Tom deals with John. It would be massive. I think it would be the biggest heavyweight of all time. But if you also enjoyed this video, please subscribe. And don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you do not miss an upload. I would appreciate it. See you next time.